One can make music loud as any band. I say one's all it takes to reach out a hand. One is enough to take a stand. I say one.
Zehayom asa Adonai, Nagila v'nismecha bo. This is a great day that God has given us. Let us rejoice, celebrate, and be glad. Welcome to the Consultation 2019. I am Rabbi Jonah Pesner. My pronouns are he, his, and him. And I am most honored to be the director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. Welcome. 4 years ago, there were 400 of us in the room and a few watching on the live stream. How many of you were among those 400? 2 years ago, there were 800 of us and thousands more watching on live stream. How many of you were with us? Well, today there are 1,200 of you here in person. And thousands more on live stream. Facebook Live is going to crash. We have so many people who are logging in. So let me at this moment give a particular shout out, because there are actually many more people who are joining us on Facebook Live than are actually physically here in DC. I want to celebrate women of Reform Judaism. Are you in the house? I love you. All of us at the Union for Reform Judaism and the RAC love our partners at Women of Reform Judaism because you do so many things for us. But the thing that I'm particularly grateful, you have increased our capacity to do live stream, to do technology, in particular supporting all of the Wi-Fi and technology access at this event. So can we celebrate WRJ? Okay. So since WRJ went to all the trouble, let's make sure we return the favor. Everybody take out your smartphone. No flip phones, people. No Nokias. None of those 1970s bricks in the car. Take out your smartphone and open your Facebook app. No, I know, there will be no Russian interference with this consultation. But we want to make sure we all share the Facebook live stream. So if you visit the RAC's Facebook page, hopefully you have the Facebook app, you go to the RAC's Facebook page, you will see the live stream. All you have to do is click share. Okay? All right. We want to make sure that all of our family, our friends, our wider community joins us as we mobilize the entire Reform Jewish movement and all of our allies to be part of the extraordinary work. All right, now that we have connected you to the people who are watching at home, let's connect you to one another. We know that we only have the power to do our justice work as one community in relationship, so take a minute, turn to the people near you, make sure you introduce yourself, not to the person you came with, but make a new friend, okay? All right, stop relating. Enough is enough. We got justice work to do. So I urge you to keep relating over the course of the next 3 days. Keep connecting. Keep making new friends. But let's get to work. In addition to introducing you to one another, shh, if you can hear my voice, do some justice. You like that, right? I want to introduce you to the very best people in the world, and here's the story to help you understand it. 4 years ago, how many of you were at the consultation and saw, okay, so this beautiful moment when I was installed as the director of the center, following my incredible predecessor, Rabbi Ambassador David Saperstein, who had, you can celebrate David Saperstein, who had led us in this role for 40 years. He was holding the Torah scroll, ready to pass it on to me in this ritual led by Rabbi Rick Jacobs, our URJ president. And there stood Rick between us, the Torah scroll in each other's hands, and David Saperstein famously said, "Jonah, I am going to hand over to you my most entrusted possession, the most wonderful beloved in the world." And I was expecting to get the Torah, and he said, "The staff of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism." So I want to acknowledge and celebrate all of the members of the staff of the RAC. Wherever you are, RAC staff, wave, stand if you're able, shout out loud, where are you? And let's also remember our RAC staff team. Though we represent all the organizations and institutions of Reform Judaism, WRJ, NIFTY, the various professional bodies, the CCAR, the ACC, and all of our institutions of reform, we are particularly honored to be part of the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism staff team, and we have many members of the URJ staff team here in addition to the RAC staff. So could all of our URJ staff family, can you be recognized? Now, here's who I really have to thank as we start this consultation on conscience. I need to thank each and every one of you here in this room and at home following us on live stream. Because at a moment when the values that we have held dear for generations are imperiled, you have been mobilizing your congregations, your communities, your youth groups, your sisterhoods, your brotherhoods, your social justice teams, your social action committees, and you have acted with meaning, with purpose, and with power, so thank you. We are here because together we say that we will not stand idly by as transgender students are made to feel unsafe in their schools. Together we say that we will not remain silent as voting rights are curtailed. Together we march alongside our NIFTY and student leaders who demand common sense gun violence prevention. Together we reject racism. We fight the rise of anti-Semitism. We combat Islamophobia. And together we resist white supremacy in all forms. And together we stand up against sexual assault and sexual harassment. And together we protect health care. Together we do not acquiesce as immigrants are demonized, deported, or denied sanctuary. And together we stand for the rights of all women and all people to make their own reproductive choices. Because we are not going back. We will not go back. We will not go back to a time when the most personal and difficult decisions were made in back alleys and abortion was illegal. We are not going back. Together in all these ways and more, we will respond as we have been responding in our cities and in our towns, in our states and in our provinces across North America. We will keep responding to the urgency of now, and we will reject all the policies that divide and demonize. So much has happened over the last 2 years. We have accomplished so much in the face of so many challenges. And so I am pleased now to be joined on this stage by two members of our Commission on Social Action of Reform Judaism. They are incredible leaders who have helped shape our movement's justice work over the past 2 years, and they are but a small example of the extraordinary leaders and activists like each one of you who are in this room and all those who are with us at home, who are helping to transform our congregations, our communities, and our country. Please welcome Yolanda Savage Narva and Heidi Siegel.
Hello, Consultation Unconscious. Woo! Since we last met, we launched the Urgency of Now, reflecting our tradition's ageless and enduring call of Torah, Rodeh Tzedek, pursue justice, focused on transgender justice, immigration justice, and criminal justice through organizing, advocacy, and relationship building. Congregations across the Reform movement built local bridges and stood up for our values in a tumultuous time. If you are a leader who joined an Urgency of Now campaign, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, more than 200 Reformed Jewish congregations, and growing, have joined the Brit Olam Network. Together, we are working toward a world of compassion, justice, and wholeness by showing moral leadership through congregational and community-based action. If you are a leader whose congregation signed the Brit Olam, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, as the world's worst refugee crisis in history continues, our Canadian congregations are stepping up to provide welcome and support. They have raised more than $450,000 and sponsored 15 families, with more on the way. Toronto's Temple Emmanuel also partnered with Congregation B'nai B'rith in Santa Barbara, California, to support a refugee family, providing their first year's rent and more. If you are a leader who supports welcoming refugees, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, 200 rabbis, cantors, lay leaders, and teens from RAC, California, gathered in Sacramento last August for a lobby day focused on criminal justice reform. RAC California also ensured the Assembly passed a groundbreaking climate change bill that requires all energy in the state to be carbon-free by 2045. If you are a leader who is part of RAC California, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, a new album of social justice anthems called Together as One was launched thanks to the vision and support of CSA Chair Liz Dunst. If you have been inspired by Together as One, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, the 2018 nonpartisan civic engagement campaign involved Reformed Jews from nearly 1,000 communities in 43 states. We engaged over 158,000 Americans, registered more than 4,000 people to vote, and organized 17 candidate forums. Reformed Jewish youth joined the campaign too. More than 8,000 college students participated with nifty events and URJ camps, including civic engagement in their programming. If you were a part of the civic engagement campaign, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, RAC Illinois was launched and helped pass the Voices Act, ensuring that survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and sex trafficking can safely report the offense without fear of deportation. If you are a leader who is part of RAC Illinois, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, after strong advocacy from Reform Movement activists, Congress passed and the President signed the first bipartisan First Step Act to begin addressing flaws in the criminal justice system by reducing some mandatory minimum sentences and creating grant programs for drug treatment, vocational training, and mentoring. If you are a leader who is committed to criminal justice reform, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, More than 1,000 speeches on gun violence prevention were delivered to members of Congress by participants in the Rax, Bernard, and Audrey Rappaport Latakin Teen Social Justice Seminars. 1 week after a teen from Temple Beth Israel in Portland delivered a speech to Congressman Kurt Schrader, he announced he would co-sponsor a bill to reduce gun violence. That bill passed the House of Representatives in February, becoming the most significant legislative step toward gun violence prevention in more than 2 decades. If you are a leader who has come to Latakin or whose congregation has come to Latakin, please raise your hand or your voice.
All right. Since we last met, nearly 90 leaders from 21 congregations visited Albany for the first RAC New York gathering and lobby day, focused on driver's licenses for all. When this bill is passed, it will make sure that nearly 800,000 undocumented New Yorkers who don't have access to a driver's license will be able to get one and make roads safer for everyone. If you are a leader who is part of RAC New York, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, Rabbi Jonah Pesner, members of the URJ board, and other Jewish activists acted in solidarity with Dreamers by staging a sit-in at the U.S. Capitol in January 2018. They were arrested by the police and drew national attention to the need to secure the status of young people who are at risk of deportation, despite knowing no other country as home. Many of our congregations have also worked to provide direct support to immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. If you are a leader who if you are a leader who remembers the biblical imperative to welcome the stranger, for you were a stranger in Egypt, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, we have helped defeat efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act and mobilize to protect access to health care for millions of Americans. If you are a leader who has helped protect the Affordable Care Act, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, Reformed congregations in Washington State helped pass Initiative 1639, raising the minimum age to purchase a semi-automatic weapon, enhancing existing background checks, and establishing waiting periods before buying assault weapons. If you are a leader who believes in common sense gun violence prevention, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, Reformed Jewish leaders from across Texas gathered in Houston to envision what they might want to do to advance social justice. Some of the vision was realized in March when more than 50 Reformed Jews came to Austin for RAC Texas's first ever advocacy day, focused on school finance reform. 1 week later, the Texas House passed a comprehensive school funding bill. If you are a leader who is part of RAC Texas, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, more than 500 Reformed Jewish student leaders in 25 states participated in gun violence prevention advocacy training and learned how to speak truth to power. We also launched our first gun violence prevention fellowship cohort, where student leaders learn community organizing skills to reduce gun violence in their own communities. If you are a leader who is committed to ending the scourge of gun violence, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, Reformed Jews in Massachusetts mobilized in support of a ballot initiative to uphold protections for transgender people across the Commonwealth. If you are a leader who believes in equality for all people, please raise your hand or your voice.
Since we last met, reproductive rights have come under new attack, undermining the long-standing protections affirmed in Roe v. Wade. If you believe in the right of every person to make decisions about their own reproductive health, please raise your hand or your voice. And
Since we last met, the RAC's work has been strengthened by the financial support of our congregations, congregants, cherished foundations, and committed donors. If you have financially supported the RAC, thank you. Please raise your hand or your voice.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you, Yolanda and Heidi. We are blessed to work with such remarkable leaders and to have them serve on the Commission on Social Action, leading the RAC's work. The Commission on Social Action is a unique body. Its 120 members include representatives from every element of the reform movement, from the URJ and CCAR to the affiliates to, of course, our congregations. Sounds a lot like the group of people who are here in this room right now. In fact, we're curious, who's in this room?
If you're a member of the Commission on Social Action, please raise your hand or raise your voice.
If you're a member of the URJ North American Board, please raise your hand or your voice.
If you're a member of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, please raise your hand or raise your voice.
If you're a leader in one of our state projects, RAC California, RAC Illinois, RAC New York, RAC Ohio, or RAC Texas, please raise your hand or your voice.
If you were a Brit Olam captain or a Brit Olam signer, please raise your hand or raise your voice.
If you're a member of the URJ executive team, please raise your hand or your voice. They're here.
If you are a member of Women of Reform Judaism, please raise your hand or raise your voice.
If you're a member of Men of Reform Judaism, please raise your hand or your voice.
If you're here with Nifty, please raise your hand or raise your voice.
If you're a member of the American Conference of Cantors, please raise your hand or your voice.
If you are a student or faculty member at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, please raise your hand or raise your voice.
If you're a high school or college student, please raise your hand or your voice.
If you're a member of PEP-RJ, NATE, NADA, ARJE, or ECE-RJ, please raise your hand or raise your voice.
If you're a congregation with a delegation of more than 10 people, including Larchmont Temple in Larchmont, New York, Temple Beth Shalom in Miami Beach, Florida, Temple Beth Tikva in Fullerton, California,
Temple B'nai Shalom in Fairfax Station, Virginia, Temple Emmanuel, Dallas, Texas, Temple Jeremiah in Northfield, Illinois, Temple Rodef Shalom, Falls Church, Virginia, or Temple Sharei Tefillah in New York, New York. You've already raised your hands and raised your voice.
And finally, if you're here because you're committed to building a world of more justice, wholeness, and compassion for everyone, please raise your hand or your voice.
The only way to build the world we envision is with each of us coming together in this room. So we thank you for your partnership and for your passion for justice.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Rabbi Jonathan Roos of Temple Sinai here in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the nation's capital. And I'm honored to share the stage with a true hero. I've had the blessing and the privilege to work with Sister Norma and to get to know her over the past 5 years. Sister Norma Pimentel is in action on the front lines of immigrant injustices that are happening along our southern border. All of us who are lobbying on Tuesday will have the opportunity to talk to the members of Congress and to our representatives about the immigration situation and to advocate for just and compassionate policies. As the executive director of Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley, Sister Norma sees the need for such policies every day, as she oversees, among other things, a respite center in McAllen, Texas, that provides much-needed support and everyday supplies to hundreds of immigrants newly arriving across the southern border. Diapers, food, a shower, clean clothing, a welcome place for toddlers and children to play, a chance to make a phone call home to reconnect with loved ones, to let them know that they are okay. All of these are found within the walls of this remarkable facility that Sister Norma runs. And I can tell you from my own experience, I've been there a few times with members of Temple Sinai. I've been with Sister Norma in the holding cells with children as young as 4 and 5, separated from their parents, to see her pray with them, to offer love and support for them, and to see the work that is done every day at the Respite Center. I encourage you to go with your congregation as well. Sister Norma, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's start by just sharing, if you would, the basic things that are going on at the Respite Center. What is the work going on at the Respite Center day to day?
You know that same question was asked to me very initially in 2014 when we got started at the Sacred Heart Parish Hall, and we responded as a community to go out to the streets of McAllen downtown, because we were seeing hundreds of families, children and mothers, infants, all dirty and muddy and hungry and scared. And so families in the community were looking at this right there in front of their own downtown streets. And so they wanted to do something. They wanted to help these families who needed help. And so my initial call was to call somebody that I know, that a lady from the community. She's actually married to somebody who is a member of the Jewish community. And Esperanza, I said, meet me at the Parish Hall of Sacred Heart. And we went out there, and she said, what for? I said, I have no idea what we're doing, but we'll figure it out as we get there. So that response, they call your friends, have them call their friends, and believe me, social media works, you know? It truly does, because everybody responded. They came to the parish hall. They brought Pampers and water and everything that we needed to help these families, these children, the babies, and everybody. And the city official shows up one of those very first days and asks me, Sister Norma, what are you doing here? You know? So I turned around and I looked at everybody, and I saw such wonderful things happening. The whole parish hall was packed with donations. It was filled with families that were needing help, and it was also filled with so many volunteers that were just responding to be there and help these families. So I turned back and I looked at him and I said, restoring human dignity, that's what we're doing.
So social media does work. I follow you on Facebook and I see the things that you're posting. And over the years, so when we first met you and you first opened the center in 2014, that was the spring and the summer where a huge wave of unaccompanied minors were coming across the border, and with their families, they needed your assistance. Other times when we came down to visit you, it had shrunk to a handful. Sometimes there was just a few dozen. Most recently, just in the past weeks, I've seen you posting that there are hundreds of people at the Respite Center every day. They're showing up all day long. It used to be they only came at certain hours. Now I see you posting in the middle of the night that you've got hundreds of people without enough food, that you don't have shoes to provide. Tell us, what is happening now? How have things changed?
You know, it's true how numbers have all of a sudden spike. It's so high that people are coming at all hours of the day and night. And so normally we would have breakfast at around 8 o'clock in the morning, around 1 or 2, lunch, then supper later on, because groups of families from the community kind of partner together and they provide supper for the families around 6 and 7. And that could be a very large group. But now we have groups coming in after 6 or 7, all the way up to 9 or 10 in the evening, and they're hungry. and you have children and mothers and everybody needing to take showers at that time, so at least we want to make sure they could be fed, And so at that time, when my day is supposed to be ending already, it can all of a sudden I have to rush to the respite center and join in the effort to be able to feed these hundreds of people who are still hungry, who just arrived, and who need our help. And so just find whatever we can and start to feed them, and maybe post somebody, say, come help if you can, or send us something, send us pizzas or whatever you can, and so we can be able to help these families. And one story that I share that really touches my heart is to the condition of these families, and when they arrived at those hours of the night, by then we have run out of almost everything. Can you imagine 800 pieces of toothbrushes? They go in one day. And so I remember recently a little boy comes to me and gets close and asks me, ¿Tienes un pantaloncito? He must have been about 3 or 4 years old, and he's asking me for a little pair of pants, clean pair of pants. He said, porque el que traigo está orinado, The one I have, I just peed on. And so I had to look at this child, and I know I don't have that pair of pants, And not at that time, 11:30 at night. And I said, mijito, no tengo, It's so hard to see a child asking you for a pair of pants because the one that he has on is dirty, And that is what we're seeing right now at the respite center.
So how do you keep your strength? How does your faith inform your work? It's been many, many years that you've been doing this, and you seem as tireless as ever, as strong as ever, as optimistic as ever. Tell us a little bit of how you make that happen for yourself.
I think there's several things that are important to make sure that we continue to have every single day the presence for the families that need our help. I think our volunteers and our staff are extraordinary people that give of themselves 100% beyond and help out. And that assurance of knowing that there are people there with me supporting and helping and responding to the families is such a reassurance. But for me personally, my prayer life is very important. My connection to my God gives me the sense of calmness that I need to be able to know that there's hope beyond what we're seeing right now, and that tomorrow will be better. I think that we cannot lose sight of God's presence in our life, because that is what gives us direction and clarity, and knowing that this is not about me, this is about humanity and what God is calling us all to respond and to be present to. And so I strongly believe that we must keep those connections and those ties to our God, because that's what drives us forward.
So tell us, you didn't come out of nowhere. You've been doing this work not just for the past 5 years. You've been working on the border for decades. And of course, before that, you didn't always think you were going to be a nun. Tell us how you got to the life of faith, and then we'll get to where you worked first on the border. So how did you decide to enter this life of faith?
That's an interesting, funny story that I always like to share when I get a chance to share a little bit about who I am. And truly, I have a gift. Since I can remember, I love to draw and paint. So I always thought of just following my gift, art. And so I graduated with a Bachelor's of Fine Arts. And my goal was to continue my life in that direction and to look forward as a profession with the gift that I have. And I think God had other plans for me. And he decided that he needed me somewhere else. And he found a way to get me there. One of the things that I like is pizza. And so a friend of mine was going to a prayer group, and I asked her, "What are you doing tonight, Linda?" And she says, "I'm going to a prayer group." And I said, "What are you doing after the prayer group?" and so she said, "I'm going to Pizza Hut." I said, "Great, come and pick me up." So she said, "No, Norma, you have to come to the prayer group because we're not going to go for you and then come back." So I had to go to the prayer group. And it was there that God had his way to touch me, you know. They actually prayed over me at the circle at the end of the prayer group. And believe me, if you don't want your life to change, don't have nobody pray over you, okay? Because it did. After that, everything about me was wanting to know more of God and who God was in my life, And so that's just how I radically changed 180 degrees towards a life dedicated to serve God in every way.
And one of your early positions, back in the 80s, you worked on the border at Casa Oscar Romero. How did that experience shape you? You were arrested once when you were working there, although that was the only time you've ever been arrested. How did those early experiences shape what you do today?
I was very young, must have been like 24, 25 years old, and my mentor, Juliana Garcia, a sister within my religious community of the Missionaries of Jesus, we were overseeing this house, this shelter for refugees who our bishop then John Fitzpatrick had entrusted to us to care for the many thousands of families that were entering our country back in the 80s. And so she always had a way to teach me and to guide me and to show me what I needed to do without telling me, you have to do this, Norma, or that. And let me just share one of particular time when we were going to lunch. We were overseeing this house and these hundreds of people that were there at this shelter. And when we were going for lunch, he says, Norma, today there's a group of people speaking in favor of the people we are helping at the refugee home. The people from Salvador and Nicaragua, and we were helping. We know the atrocities that they're going through, and they're speaking at the congressman's office. And so why don't we go support them? It was in that lunch hour. So he said, sure. So we show up to the congressman's office, and at that time, when these people were waiting for the congressman's response, they called the cops, and everybody was getting arrested. And she turns to look at me and she says, Norma, when you believe in something and you run away when things get tough, then you don't stand for nothing. So we both can't get arrested because we have a shelter to take care of. And so she tells me, you decide. And I looked at her, and she's like 50 years old, and I was 25. And I said, I guess it's me, right? So she said, okay, bye. So, that moment for me, even though it was very difficult, it brought into everything I was brought up to believe and do, respect the law enforcement. They tell you to move, you move. All of a sudden, who I was meant to be or called to be is not challenging someone, an officer, to tell me to step out and leave. And so I had to make a choice and start defining myself, who I am. I think we all have those defining moments. God definitely has found a way to help me define myself and discover who I am and who He wants me to be.
In addition to thanks to God, thanks to good mentors, and to pizza, because without that we wouldn't have you here doing what you're doing. So since you've been involved from a faith perspective as a faith leader on the southern border from the 80s through today, how has it changed, not just in the past 4 years, but in the decades that you've been involved? What have you seen about who's coming over the border, and what have you seen in terms of policies that are making things better or worse?
Since then, since Casa Romero to today, there has always been a controversial issue about whether we should support and defend and protect life in the most vulnerable and people who are crossing into our country and entering our country in those circumstances, people who question whether that is the right thing to do, they're saying that is wrong. I had one experience back in the 80s when we had Casa Romero. I needed to buy a Xerox machine, and I called this lady I want to buy a Xerox machine. She comes over to the house, and she tells me right up front, she says, Sister, I am 100% against helping illegal aliens, And I said, thank you for letting me know. Let me show you what I do and why. And so I had her go with me and meet the families and the children and explain to them what was happening and why we had that shelter and why we were helping these families. When we get back to the office, she turns around and tells me, "Sister, I am 100% in favor of what you're doing." You know, that evening, her husband calls me and tells me, "Sister, I don't know what you did to my wife today, but she came home and she said, if Sister Norma ever calls you, you make sure and you do whatever she tells you," okay? So I think that what has changed is the fact that so many people have become aware that this is not a political issue. This is a humanitarian reality that we're facing, okay?
So here you have representatives of synagogues from across the United States, Canada, international, from the Reform movement and beyond. How can synagogues from our movement and beyond our movement, how can our people support the immediate needs that you're addressing at the border and that long-term policy-oriented work that you're also doing? How can we help?
Well, there's so many ways that we can help. Is to bring consciousness to others and to help them understand what this is, what is happening. We are seeing human persons, humanity in distress, and we must never look away from that and discard it as indifferent or something that is not our responsibility to care for. I think that we all have that responsibility to reach out to those who don't understand, who haven't been able to see that reality. I always say that many people are so detached and indifferent because they kind of live in a bubble, you know? So I go around popping bubbles, you know? Making sure they don't lose their humanity in the process of all these things that they hear, this negative, dehumanizing ways of looking at an immigrant. I think we need to bring people into awareness and help them realize and restore their humanity. And so our job for all of us is to make sure that we help others see. And then not only at the grassroots level or at the border, but also at the level of here in Washington, D.C., with our leaders who we know are there to help us create policies and laws that should protect everybody, you know, every human being. And they should be laws that don't lose sight of the fact that we must respect human dignity and respect life overall.
So let me just bring this to an end where we started. I would urge everyone to get to McAllen. If you can go down there with your congregation, with family, with friends, there's a very effective volunteer coordinator. There is really nothing like seeing it with your own eyes. You may already be a believer in supporting Sister Norma. You may not be in the position of that Xerox representative that Sister Norma converted, but there's really nothing like seeing it with your own eyes and seeing the people who are there. But it's also clear, we know that from your origins with this respite center at the Sacred Heart Church, you couldn't keep their social hall forever. So since 2014, you've had to move to a new location. And now, because of city regulations, you have to move to another location. You're in the middle of a campaign. It's going to take $5.5 million to really get a respite center and to provide the work that you're doing. How is that going?
Well, it definitely needs the support of more people. I think we're doing good. But I think that the more we can all come together and recognize that this is a response for all of us to make sure that at the border we have a dignified facility that receives and welcomes the families is very important. And so the more that can join us in making sure this happens, it's wonderful. And coming to volunteer definitely is good because so many people truly help us out. This is not just Catholics, this is every single faith denomination. Everybody comes together. The Jewish community, we have Rabbi Claudio Kogan there in our area who truly helps us out. If you all know him, he's a wonderful man. And he always receives support for so many people from all over the United States. And he's always showing up. Sister, I'm coming, and I have all this clothing and food and things like that. So it all comes because I'm sure many of you are supporting him and people like him as well. But if you can join in this effort, our website, humanitarianrespitecenter.org, and you can see how you can help.
Sister Norma, I think I speak for most people, but not everyone here, when I say thank you for the incredible work that you're doing. May God's blessings continue to be on you. We're with you
Thank
with
you.
our hearts, our hands, our checkbooks, and certainly our prayers. Sister Norma.
Thank you.
What an incredible leader and inspiration Sister Norma is. Am I right, folks? Say it again. Say it again. Oh. She reminds us that in every generation we are called to step up and fight the injustices of our time. I want to share with you a story of a remarkable couple who did just that in their own time 80 years ago. In the spring of 1939, as the Nazi regime came to power, European Jews seeking refuge found the world's door tragically closed to them. U.S. laws made it nearly impossible for Jews to find a haven in the United States. Canada was similarly unwelcoming. In Philadelphia, Gilbert and Eleanor Kraus, proud members of Congregation Knesset Israel in Elkins Park, responded heroically. Through their own ingenuity and commitment, and at great personal risk, the Krauses served and saved 50 children from Vienna's Jewish community and brought them to safety in the United States. Theirs was one of the largest private rescue operations before the beginning of World War II. Today, we face the greatest refugee crisis in world history. Fleeing persecution and violence, families are being forced to seek safety far from the places they have called home for generations. And again, the world's response has been underwhelming. We also see that the deportation of undocumented immigrants from the United States, despite in many cases living and contributing to our communities for decades, and we see the separation of families on the southern border with Mexico, the detention of children, and the anguish of parents fleeing violence. And the previous Attorney General of the United States said that the Bible supports ripping children away from their parents. Well, this past year, I was privileged to lead a Bible study right outside the Department of Justice, and guess what? Turns out if you actually read the Bible, on every single page of that good book, we are taught that our place, our role, is to protect the most vulnerable in the world. Now, we know what our tradition and our history commands us, and this moment, it breaks our hearts. As refugees, asylum seekers, and undocumented immigrants, particularly children, face cruelty and hardships as they travel with the hope of finding security, the Kraus family is once again demonstrating the compassion and commitment to human dignity that is too often in short supply. Peter Kraus is a grandson of Gilbert and Eleanor. He and his wife Jill are members of Temple Emmanuel in New York City, led by Rabbi Joshua Davidson, right there in the first row. Raise your hand, Rabbi Davidson. And together, Peter and Jill are honoring their family's legacy. With their support, we will be deepening and strengthening the work already happening in our U.S. and Canadian congregations to welcome in our very midst immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. This isn't a story about yesterday. This is a story about today and tomorrow, and we are all in this story. And I have come to know and love Peter and Jill, and so admire the way in which they are stepping up. Now, they're probably at this moment not relishing this moment in the spotlight, because what they would want is that we just dive into the work. and begin to save those lives. But we need to acknowledge and express our gratitude and our deep partnership in making a difference, a huge difference. Their generous multi-year grant to the URJ will allow us to launch a movement-wide immigration and refugee justice initiative known as the Gilbert and Eleanor Kraus Initiative for Immigrant and Refugee Justice. We know that guided by the words of the Torah and our Jewish values, we can help provide immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers the safety and stability they deserve. Please join me in welcoming Jill and Peter Kraus.
Hi, my name's Jill Kraus, and this is my husband, Peter. We're here to celebrate the announcement of the Gilbert and Eleanor Kraus Initiative for Immigrant and Refugee Justice. The new initiative is inspired by Peter's grandparents, Gilbert and Eleanor Kraus, and their journey to Austria and Germany in April of 1939 to rescue the largest group of unaccompanied minors brought to the United States leading up to World War II. The Krauses were an ordinary couple. Living in Philadelphia, Gilbert Kraus was a labor lawyer who had his own law practice. He was also the publisher of the Philadelphia Ledger. In late 1939, Gilbert and Eleanor were approached by the leaders of a local organization called Brit Shalom. They were concerned about the plight of Jewish children in Germany. Using his legal background, Gilbert devised a way to utilize dead visas to allow children to migrate to the United States. Relying on their personal ingenuity and tenacity, they followed their conscience and against all odds rescued 50 children imperiled by the Nazis in the run-up to World War II. Had the war not started shortly after the group arrived in New York, many more might have been saved. We were unaware of this incredible legacy until 15 years ago, when Peter's father sent us a manuscript, written by his mother, Eleanor, Peter's grandmother. The mission was likely kept secret due to the intense anti-Semitism in America during the 1930s, and the fear that publicity could endanger both the children and future Jews who looked to immigrate to the United States. Leaders of the Philadelphia Jewish community actually advised Peter's grandparents against going and threatened to ruin their business if they did. Peter's grandparents chose to move forward regardless because to them, this situation simply could not be overlooked. They went into the heart of Nazi Germany in the spring of 1939, traveled from Berlin to Vienna, interviewed the children and their families, and traveled back to Berlin with the children, successfully gained permission to bring the children to the U.S. Perhaps the most poignant moment in the story is the description of Eleanor at the departure of the children by train from Vienna to Berlin. Jews were not permitted to raise their arms, as this could be seen as the Nazi salute, which they were not permitted to do. As a consequence, the parents of the children all gathered on the train platform with their hands at their side and wished their children goodbye without being able to wave to them. The moment Eleanor described was heartbreaking.
Well, I gave her the hard part. When we discovered the story, we took a trip to Austria and Germany ourselves to follow in their footsteps. There we discovered 600 questionnaires that were submitted by the parents of all the children who were interviewed to come to the United States, of which only 50 were selected. In Berlin, we visited the synagogue where the kids stayed while their visas to America were processed. It was an emotional experience, and it still stays with us, and it inspired us to take some action on our own. My grandparents saw a need during an unstable time to bring endangered children to the safety of the United States. And they had to overcome barriers that severely restricted immigration. 80 years later, we're still facing the same barriers, restrictions, and consequences in regards to immigrants and refugees. I'm sure this will happen again in the future, but it cannot deter us from doing what is right. Like so many others, Jill and I find this incredibly difficult to understand. As the United States, the country we're all a part of, was founded as a place for emigrating people to start a new life, and it has made us all the better for it. But the idea of keeping this embedded in our roots has been interrupted throughout history, and we feel a responsibility to do our small part to help the United States push past this anti-immigration sentiment and terrible xenophobia. That is what this initiative intends to do. The Gilbert and Eleanor Kraus Initiative for Immigrant and Refugee Justice will have a strong impact on advocacy around public policy, legislation, and the rights of undocumented immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and their families. And we will provide support to help the URJ congregations and youth programs promote immigrant rights in their communities. More specifically, the initiative will activate and train Reformed Jews to impact public policy on federal, state, provincial, and local levels. Educate the public and communicate the current issues. Provide micro-grants to congregations and youth programs to act and to advocate. Further expand the work of Religious Action Center of Reformed Judaism, which has long held the movement's immigrant and refugee justice efforts. We hope that this story and the emotion that's connected to it serves as an inspiration to you and to others. Each of you have incredible power as individuals. Don't forget that. Gilbert and Eleanor did not. They were faced with unimaginable resistance as they took action in a much more difficult world, but still chose to stand up for what was right to improve their world and our world. Today's immigration and refugee crisis can seem overwhelming, and at times I'm sure it is, but we can all commit to being part of an improving process and of helping our country find an answer that lives up to the legacy as an open and inclusive nation. Thank you, everybody.
Jill and Peter, thank you. We cannot know how many lives will be touched by the work you are helping to make possible, but we know from our Talmud, both the Palestinian and the Babylonian Talmud, that to save one life is, in fact, to save the world. And your grandparents saved 50 lives, and that has enabled worlds to live on. May you be blessed as you are a blessing to others in this extraordinary moment of need and urgency. To oversee this work, we're thrilled to have recently hired Dr. Julia Paley, our new Director of Immigration Justice. Throughout her career, Dr. Paley has addressed social justice issues, including human rights and justice for immigrants, including co-founding and organizing a Washington, D.C. area interfaith network to defend immigrants from deportation, and working as a trainer engaged in cross-cultural dialogue and collaboration with grassroots organizations fighting for justice. With her expert guidance, we are confident that our movement is poised to make an even greater impact on this issue that speaks to our history as a people who have known what it means to be in search of a safe and secure place to call home. With her help, our movement will live up to the inspiring example of Gilbert, Eleanor, Peter, and Jill Kraus. Please welcome Dr. Julia Paley.
Hello, it is such an honor to be leading the Gilbert and Eleanor Kraus Initiative for Immigrant and Refugee Justice as its new Director of Immigration Justice. This role has deep meaning for me because, like many of you, my great-grandparents and my grandparents were immigrants and refugees from Germany and Russia, where they faced economic hardship and religious persecution. I live with a deep knowledge that if they had not found refuge in the United States, I would not be alive today. Moreover, I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I've spent many years engaging with social movements in Latin America, and so I know the roots of migration and the importance of building strong cross-cultural connections. For all these reasons, I feel very identified with current immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers, driven by the knowledge that we are all in this together, and motivated by the Jewish precept of love thy neighbor as thyself. The RAC has been engaged in immigration justice for many years, and most recently as part of the Urgency of Now campaign. And thanks to the generosity of Jill and Peter Kraus, the new 4-year initiative will support Reform congregations in advancing immigration justice by providing direct support and connections to resettlement agencies and other immigrant support organizations. We will establish a mini grant process to assist congregations in doing this vital work. Immigration and refugee issues will be core to Litaken and social justice seminars for 2,000 congregational youth each year. And we will train URJ youth and interns and student clergy to understand how they can help children and families in their communities. And we are going to continue to advocate at all levels of government for just and compassionate immigration and refugee policies for undocumented immigrants, for DACA youth, for temporary protected status holders, for refugees, and for asylum seekers. Above all, we want to hear from you. Let us know how the RAC can be supportive in your efforts in your local areas. Tell us what you'd like to see. The current moment is one of moral crisis. With 900 congregations, 2 million people, and all the convictions of our faith, the Reform movement has the potential and the power to contribute to change. Please join in this momentous opportunity to make the world a more just place for immigrants, for refugees, for asylum seekers, and ultimately for all of us. I really, truly look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Two years ago, at the 2017 Consultation on Conscience, the rabbinic participants heard a call. Faced with rhetoric, policies, and practices of demonization and division, and called by the Torah's injunction to protect the widow, orphan, and stranger, they wanted to repair the breach that was growing wider in our culture. Yes, we could offer sermons and Torah study and pastoral care, but to fortify the work, we saw a need for new resources. And so a project was born. Edited by Rabbi Seth Limmer, who will join us later today, and the RAC's own Rabbi Jonah Pesner, Moral Resistance and Spiritual Authority was published by CCR Press earlier this year, with more than 30 essays that inform, provoke, and inspire. If you authored one of the essays in Moral Resistance and Spiritual Authority, please raise your hand so that we can thank you and celebrate you. Across Washington, there's no shortage of policy conferences, trainings, mobilizations, and passionate activists committed to change. What makes our presence here unique, and what this remarkable compilation seeks to capture, is the Jewish underpinning of our commitment to justice. With centuries of tradition and the most ancient texts to draw on, we are strengthened for the challenges of the present. I know that every reader of this book will feel the same. We're so pleased that copies of Moral Resistance and Spiritual Authority will be available for purchase at the CCR table during this consultation on conscience. In these times, all of us, rabbis and lay leaders and cantors and educators alike, need the sustenance, guidance, and wisdom of our faith more than ever.
A few years ago at the biennial conference, URJ's biennial conference in Orlando, Joy Friedman of the Religious Action Center took Rabbi Rachel Greengrass and myself aside and asked us to meet someone special. That someone was Desmond Meade. He shared his story with us, a story that started with despair and hopelessness, addiction and homelessness, but became a story of resilience and redemption, the story of a second chance. From the bowels of prison, Desmond emerged to complete his education and against all odds, attain a law degree. But as a former felon, he was prohibited from taking the Florida bar or even exercising his right to vote. Having turned his life around, the criminal justice system barred him from returning to life as a full-fledged citizen. When Desmond Meade couldn't vote for his own wife for the Florida legislature, he became president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, leading the charge to mobilize a nonpartisan statewide campaign to restore voting rights to more than 1.4 million returning citizens through the passage of Amendment 4 in November's election. The passing of this amendment represents the single largest expansion of voting rights in the United States of America in half a century, ending 150 years of Jim Crow era law in Florida. His sheer will, vision, and passion have inspired thousands of us, teaching us the true meaning of teshuvah, the true meaning of a second chance. He also knows the importance of partnership, and I want to share with you this short video clip taken right after Amendment 4 passed. Well, he looked good. It was a shout out. It was a shout out to the Reform Movement for being his partners in helping Amendment 4 to pass. And I am so proud to introduce my friend and visionary, now named by Time magazine as one of the most 100 influential people in 2019, Desmond Meade.
Thank you. I hope I get this right. Shalom. And I'm channeling that spirit that I had, when I was in the 7th grade and I used to play football. And my dad was a pastor, and he would require that every Friday there's Bible study for the young people. The problem that I faced was that on Fridays were our football games. And so I would miss so many football games, and I didn't know how to tell my coach and teammates that I had to be at Bible study instead of playing, with the team. And so the only thing that I could come up with was to tell them that I was Jewish. Thank God for Sammy Davis Jr., because he made it believable. But good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. It is definitely an honor to be here at the Religious Action Center Consortium of Consciousness. I'm going to tell you that first and foremost, I am so appreciative of the work that this organization has done. And it's not just about making phone calls and helping to collect signatures and to getting the vote out, but it's the love that I'm most appreciative of. That you saw a cause. You saw individuals who at one point were broken. And because of the love that you have for your fellow man and your fellow women, that you stepped up to the cause and you locked arms with people from different faiths and you stood on what was right. You stood on that phrase that when the debt is paid, it's paid. And because of you, because of that love that you've shown, we were able to transform the state of Florida and this world. Thank you. And they always say that the characteristics of a great organization is nothing but a reflection of its leader. And so I definitely want to give a huge shout out to Rabbi Pesner for being the great man that he is. But let's talk about what we did. I think it's amazing. When you look at the issue, when you talk about voting, and when you talk about felons or returning citizens as we call them, and you talk about the state of Florida, those three ingredients are toxic. And you bring those three together, nothing good should ever happen with those three. You let the experts tell it that there was no way possible that you're going to, in the state of Florida, in this political climate, be able to win a measure that will restore voting rights to over 1 million people with felony convictions. It's impossible. But that is exactly what we did. And when you look at the fact that we did it and there was no major opposition to the amendment, that the people whose folks thought would oppose it actually endorsed it. When you look at on election night, over 1 million more people voted for Amendment 4 than any other candidate that was on that ballot. And when you look at the fact that approximately 1 million people who voted for Amendment 4 also voted for Governor DeSantis, then you have to wonder what was so special about Amendment 4 that caused people from all walks of life, from all political persuasions, to come together and do the right thing. That element was love. Was love. I know Rabbi Pomerantz, when she was introducing me, she talked about leading this bipartisan or nonpartisan movement, and I'm going to correct that a little bit. It was neither. When folks used to try to label it as such, I used to always push back and say, no. What we have is an organic grassroots movement that welcomes and enjoys bipartisan support. The very key difference is that we did not lead with politics. We led with people. Because that was the most important thing to our campaign. Not about a left, not about a right, but about people, everyday people, the lives of people who were suffering and their family members. That was the most important thing to us. And we were able to connect with each other along the lines of humanity. When you talk about creating moments in which this country is great, when you talk about creating moments in when the world is great, sometimes we look to the worst moments. We look to the natural disasters. We look at the aftermath of hurricanes, and what we see is beauty in our humanity. Because we see people that don't care about what the color of your skin is, don't care about where you came from, don't care about how you got here. They don't care about how much money you make. What they care about is that they see another human being, that they see themselves in you and want to come to your aid. I always used to tell people that when you were driving down the street and we see an accident and we stop to help and we get out and we run up to that person that's laying on the floor, that first question is not going to be, did you vote for Donald Trump? It's not. It's going to be, are you okay and how can I help? That's the beauty of humanity. And so what we seen on election night in November of 2018, those 5.1 million votes, they were votes that was not based on hate. They were votes that was not based on fear. But rather, they were votes that was based on love, forgiveness, and redemption. That in spite of the political climate that we're in spite of the rhetoric that tries to drive us apart and be fearful of each other, we actually got to see on election night love winning the day. Because we know fear cannot drive out fear and hate cannot drive out hate, but love can. And so what we accomplished was that we ended a legacy of Jim Crow. That prior to Amendment 4, now I'm going to let you have your time. Go ahead, do that. Go ahead. Because that is something to celebrate. That is something to be joyous about. Because not only did you do it, you didn't do it with hate or fear. We did it with love. We defeated Jim Crow with love. Prior to Amendment 4 winning, anyone with a felony conviction in the state of Florida lost the right to vote for life. That means that they would never, ever get to vote again unless the governor, whoever it may be at that time, find it within the goodness of his heart to show some type of mercy. What Amendment 4 did was destroy that barrier.